A scrape is not to be confused with a rub. A rub is where a deer would take his antlers and scrape the bark off of a tree. Some people get that confused, so I'm going real basic here, but we'll work through this whole thing for beginners and advanced people, what we know about scrapes. But a scrape is typically when a deer comes up and paws the ground away. He's taking debris, he's taking leaves, straw, grass, other pieces of bark and twigs and stuff. He's getting it all out of the way so that he can leave scent on the ground, mostly through urine. There's another facet of the scrape, right?
Yes, exactly. So above most scrapes, almost all the time, there will be some sort of a branch that's about head high or a little higher for a deer. It's called an overhanging limb, and referred to as a licking branch of the scrape is the other big component, okay? You will hardly ever find a scrape without a licking branch. This one's got a really good one. You can see multiple spots on the limb up here where it's been licked and chewed on throughout this past season. You can tell this scrape was really, really frequented by deer. Why do they frequent scrapes so much?
It's a community signpost for them. It's like the cafe, right? It's where they can go and see who's doing what and talk to people, right? And talk to deer, actually. Because we talk to people at the cafe, they talk to deer.
That's right.
So this is their communication. What they do with this is they are leaving scent and also picking up the scent of other deer at this place, right?
Yeah.
So the different types of scent they're leaving are, I talked about it earlier, but urine is one of them. And typically a deer will come up to a scrape, and the first thing it'll do is smell this licking branch right here. The licking branch is scent from previous deer's saliva and preorbital, right?
Preorbital gland. So right here, if you ever look at a deer, if you ever are privileged enough to kill one, it's pretty nice. But
yes,
you can learn some stuff besides just high-fiving, right? Woo! Okay, but also it's good to learn. If you look at a deer's eyeball, there's a little crusty spot right where like our tear duct is. That's called their preorbital gland. So you see them sometimes in the moment, if you're privileged enough for this, like when you're deer hunting like around a scrape, you can see a buck rubbing his face on that licking branch and also licking around, because you probably realize this, a lot of times whenever you smell pizza, you can kind of taste pizza. That's how it is for deer, but even on a more advanced level, those two senses are really well connected. So they can lick this stuff, and it's also letting them absorb some of that scent and communicate with other deer that way. And then down to the ground as well.
There's an interdigital gland, which is in between their toes. And, or they're, it's a cloven hoofed animal, so in between the cloves of their hoof. And so you see all these tracks in here. Those are deer stepping and licking the licking branch, but they're also consequentially leaving that interdigital scent there. And so when a deer noses down on the ground, he smells the urine, he smells the interdigital. I mean, it's just the best way for them to communicate who is in the area, right?
Talk a little bit more about the urine stuff and about the other gland that they use there as well.
What you'll see when a deer makes a scrape a lot of times, we even saw this in the last deer you shot in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He made a little, didn't make a scrape, but hit a little scrape, a licking branch. We didn't even know there was a scrape there. But you can see the deer, and a lot of times what they'll do is when they go to start, urinating on the ground, their tail will raise a little bit and start just twitching, and they'll start rubbing their back legs together about like this, kind of not, too fast-paced, but they're just getting it rubbed into their tarsal glands, which is a place that there's all kinds of scent.
It's kind of like their inner ankle, kind of, on a deer. It's in a different position, but kind of the same bone structure there. And they're just using that urine kind of as a medium to get that scent to the ground.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is when a buck comes up to a scrape, this is something you see kind of play itself out in nature in a lot of different ways. But aggressive male species, right? So like deer, I don't know, fish a lot, whales, they always have these ways of kind of trying to eliminate the other males from the situation. That's part of why deer paw at scrapes. They're trying to mix all that up, get that other stuff out of the way. That way their scent is the freshest and they're the dominant guy around. And that's part of why you'll see them paw it, as well as when they paw, it splits that digit apart right there and allows that scent gland to get down there in the dirt.
Yeah.
So,
fun fact real quick, the interdigital gland is actually when you have a tracking dog that comes out and tracks a wounded deer. That's actually what most of those tracking dogs are working off of. It's not actually the blood trail. So I just learned that in the last couple of years, but it's very interesting.
It's a neat thing, man. Dogs are real good. It's crazy how good they can smell. And deer are the same way, right?
Yep.
That's why deer do this, because they can smell that stuff just as good as a tracking dog can. So why are deer making a scrape? Are they using it to reproduce, or like what's the?
So you get scrapes that are made in the early season sometimes. You know, September, you'll see some scrapes popping up. We've seen it even in Texas. But most places where the rut is really heavy, especially in the first 14 days or so of November, a lot of times about a month ahead of that, you'll start seeing these scrapes pop up just in random spots that you've never seen them before. Now, they do exist throughout the year in some what we call hub scrapes sometimes. There's probably other names for them.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a hub scrape. It's where everything meets together and lots of deer go through that area. But in this case, the deer are making this so that they can communicate to each other, you know, either does saying we're ready to breed, or bucks saying, you know, I'm here and I'm dominant. So there's a lot of different things that they can say with it. Anything else you can think of as far as communication goes?
I think that there might be a level of estrus that's conveyed in scrapes. I'm not a biologist, right? I don't know that for sure, but it seems like that there's some temperature / calendar thing going on with scrapes as well. And deer can meter what's going on in the rut world with, you know, the does in the general area and stuff. And I've also found that like does sometimes just kind of hang out around scrapes. I've seen that before, especially in Kansas, where they'll just, like when a doe's kind of ready to be tended, she'll just kind of stay around a scrape for a while because she knows a buck is going to show up there sooner or later.
Stay in the open, stand up a lot. They won't bed as much as they normally do in a day. Yeah, and they're kind of saying like, hey, look at me, I'm up here. A lot of times we've seen them get up on higher ground too and just be visible from a long distance in open country. So, you know, when it comes to that portion of the season especially, where these does are ready, we typically think of that as like a hot and heavy seeking phase. So, I mean, there are multiple ways to kill deer around a scrape, right? That's one of them. But there's other ways that start earlier than that. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the reasons this scrape is here is because we have a really dense bedding cover back here, and there's a really good food source over here. And on the way in, we were noticing trails that were skirting back and forth between those two things. A lot of east and west trail action here, and this scrape is on one of those trails that kind of cuts right back up that way. What can happen as a hunter is that scrapes are really, really heavy in nighttime action, especially this one because we're not far from the road, and that's usually something that signifies to me is that deer don't spend a lot of time in the daylight near the road. But as the temperatures cool, especially when cold fronts roll through, those big bucks get antsy and they want to get on their feet. They want to go chase does, even when it might be a little bit early. But they want to get out and establish that, hey, I'm here, I'm the boss. It's a great, great time as a hunter to take advantage of a deer doing something kind of dumb, because they're not very dumb very often, right? You actually had a really good opportunity to do this in Illinois a couple years back.
Yeah, for sure. We had a cold front coming in that night. The particular spot set up really well on a northwest wind, which was a cold front wind, for me to hunt a deer moving from the west to this scrape, and I killed a really big deer. It was awesome. He was maybe not the biggest one in there at the time too, and so it was a really, really cool, you know, instance. And one thing that we did to learn those deer were in there was we found this scrape in the summertime. KC found it, and we hung a camera over it. And so that's something we would do here maybe, because this is a good scrape. Like this is a fairly big scrape. It's got a good licking branch. It's been hit in several locations on the branch. It's just close to the road. So let's hang a camera here. Think about what time the deer are coming. Is it really close to shooting light? Because if it is, we don't need to hunt far from here. If it's 8 o'clock, we may need to figure out where the closest bedding is. You know, obviously in the rut thing, you know, all bets are off too. Like this may be a spot to hunt in the rut, especially if your camera is telling you that. It's a good reason to use a cell camera where legal too. If you know, it lets you know day to day, very up to date information about whether this the rut is really kicking out loose and you're getting daytime movement and stuff like that.
Another cool thing about using cameras on scrapes is you get to see a lot of interesting deer interactions. I can remember that from Illinois, where you could see like dominance starting to happen even back in the summertime with different deer. And it's advantageous for you as a hunter who likes to use a trail camera, because there's usually always a tree to hang your camera on.
Yes.
So it works out really, really good as a hunter. And I think that there's not really a better combination than a cell camera over a scrape, watching that thing, monitoring deer movement into late October, and moving in and pretty much doing a buck extraction, where you go in looking to kill that night. You're not observing, you're not sitting back, taking it easy, being conservative. You know that there's a good chance that you're going to get a daylight buck to come to a scrape. And that gets me excited.
Yeah, this is one of our favorite places to kill deer is a scrape. And it's not something that we've killed a ton of deer over, but we have killed them over. And the thing is, like KC's saying, you go in and you focus on a spot, you can see the trail coming in. And what we've got, like he said earlier here, we've got bedding back here, we've got food back over here. And what you'll get is this movement from bed to food of does, right? And sometimes you'll get a cross trail that bucks are traveling. And so they will place a scrape on one of these, say, east and west movement, trails here, and they'll be going north and south checking. There will be scrapes, and that's where you end up with like a scrape line, right? So you can figure stuff out from your camera that way, know which way the buck's coming in. Say he's coming in from the north, you need a north wind. So hunt him on a north wind, which also happens to be, if you get north wind in October, it's going to be cold, they're going to be moving, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you should do right now in the postseason is get your mapping system out, go around, log all these scrapes where they're at, find the biggest one.
Yes.
Okay, that's the easiest thing. Find the biggest one, mark that thing. Know you can go back in June or July, put a camera on that thing, monitor that thing, and get ready to kill a deer this fall over a scrape.
That's right. Also, you can watch our next video here in the postseason scouting list. It's going to be about rubs, all things rubs, how to hunt them, why they're made, what they're made for, what they do with them, what we should do with them, all that. And remember, this is your element.
Live in it.